The call came on December 20th at 0600 hours, exactly the way military calls always come, crisp and professional and life-changing. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when my phone rang, and the voice on the other end identified herself as Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez from Pentagon Youth Development Programs. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "we received your nomination for Marcus Thompson, and we need to discuss some very exciting developments." My heart stopped for a moment as she continued speaking, her words carrying the weight of official military recognition. "Your son's application materials were extraordinary," she said. "The analytical assessments he provided, the veteran testimonials, the leadership examples you documented, they paint a picture of a truly exceptional young person. We would like to schedule an in-person evaluation and recognition ceremony." I stepped outside onto the back porch, not wanting to wake Marcus, and listened as Lieutenant Colonel Martinez explained that Marcus had been selected as one of only 12 children nationwide for the Pentagon's inaugural Youth Strategic Leadership Recognition Program. The program was designed to identify and honor children who demonstrated exceptional analytical thinking, leadership potential, and commitment to service before their 10th birthday. She explained that a delegation of Pentagon officials would be visiting our home on December 30th to formally present Marcus with his recognition certificate and discuss opportunities for continued mentorship through high school and beyond. The program included full academic scholarships, summer leadership camps at military academies, and direct pathways to service academy appointments when he reached college age. As I listened to her describe the program's benefits and Marcus's selection, I felt vindication flowing through my veins like electricity. Every moment my family had dismissed him, every gathering they had excluded him from, every time they had made him feel like he was too much or not enough, all of it was about to be proven catastrophically wrong by the highest military authority in the nation. After hanging up, I stood on that porch for 10 minutes, just breathing in the cold December air and processing what this meant. The Pentagon had seen in my son exactly what I had seen, exactly what those veterans at the hospital had recognized, exactly what my family had been too blind and small-minded to understand. Marcus wasn't just a smart kid with unusual interests. He was genuinely gifted in ways that the United States military considered strategically valuable. I walked back inside to find Marcus at the kitchen table, carefully reading a book about World War II naval battles while eating his cereal with the methodical precision he applied to everything. "Good morning, Dad," he said without looking up. "Did you know that the USS Enterprise was the most decorated ship in the Navy during World War II, but almost got scrapped after the war because people didn't understand its historical value?" The parallel hit me like a physical blow. Here was my son, casually delivering a profound metaphor for his own situation while completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. I sat down across from him, watching him read, and felt an overwhelming surge of pride mixed with protective fury at everyone who had failed to see his brilliance. "Marcus," I said carefully, "how would you feel if some very important people wanted to meet you and talk about all the things you're interested in?" He looked up from his book, those dark eyes focusing on me with laser intensity. "What kind of important people?" he asked, and I could see his analytical mind already processing possibilities and implications. "Military people," I said. "People who work at the Pentagon and understand the things you study and think they're valuable." His entire face transformed, lighting up with a joy so pure and genuine that I had to blink back tears. "Really?" he asked quietly, as if he couldn't quite believe that adults in positions of authority might actually value his interests and abilities. "Really," I confirmed, and watched as he carefully closed his book and straightened in his chair, already preparing himself mentally for something important. The dignity and composure he showed in that moment, the way he instinctively understood the significance of what I was telling him, confirmed every single thing I had written in that nomination letter. I spent the next 2 days preparing Marcus for the visit without fully explaining what was happening. I didn't want to overwhelm him or create pressure, but I also needed him to understand that this was significant. We reviewed his favorite military history topics, organized his model aircraft collection, and practiced the kind of respectful interaction he had always naturally displayed with the veterans at the hospital. What I didn't do was tell my family anything about what was coming. They had forfeited their right to share in Marcus's moment of recognition when they decided he wasn't worth including in their Christmas celebration. They would learn about his extraordinary achievement the same way everyone else would, by witnessing it firsthand when Pentagon officials showed up at our door. During those 2 preparation days, I found myself remembering all the moments when Marcus had demonstrated the exact qualities that had earned him this recognition. Like the time when he was 6 and we were at a military museum, and he had corrected the tour guide's explanation of tank warfare tactics with such polite precision that the guide had asked him where he learned so much about military strategy. Or the afternoon when he was 7 and we encountered a veteran having a panic attack in the grocery store parking lot. While other people stared or walked away, Marcus had approached the man calmly and started talking to him about aircraft carriers, somehow knowing instinctively that focusing the veteran's mind on familiar military topics would help ground him and stop the attack. There was the evening when Marcus had spent 3 hours teaching my neighbor's grandfather, a Korean War veteran, how to use a tablet so he could video call his family. Marcus had shown patience and respect that most adults couldn't muster, breaking down complex instructions into simple steps and celebrating each small victory with genuine enthusiasm. The night before the Pentagon visit, I tucked Marcus into bed and sat on the edge of his mattress the way I had every night since he was small. He looked up at me with those serious eyes that had always seen too much and understood too deeply. "Dad," he said quietly, "tomorrow is going to be important, isn't it?" "Very important," I confirmed. "Are you nervous?" "A little," he admitted. "But mostly I'm excited. I've never had adults who weren't family or the veterans want to talk to me about the things I care about. Most people think I'm weird for knowing about military stuff." "You're not weird, buddy," I said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "You're exceptional, and tomorrow some very smart people are going to confirm that for you." He smiled at that, a real smile that reached his eyes, and settled back into his pillow with the contentment of a child who finally felt understood. December 30th dawned clear and cold, with the kind of crisp winter light that makes everything look sharp and significant. I woke at 05:30, old military habits keeping me punctual even in civilian life, and spent an hour reviewing the house and making sure everything was perfect for our visitors. Marcus was already awake when I checked on him at 0600, sitting on his bed in his pajamas, carefully reading through his favorite book about Air Force history. He looked up when I entered and said, with the kind of calm maturity that still amazed me, "I've been thinking about what questions they might ask me, and I want to make sure I give good answers." "Just be yourself," I told him. "That's all you've ever needed to be, and it's exactly why they're coming to see you." He nodded solemnly, understanding in that way he always did when something mattered, and I felt my chest swell with pride at the remarkable young man he was becoming. At 0800, we had breakfast together, both of us quieter than usual, but comfortable in our shared anticipation. Marcus ate with his typical methodical precision, but I could see the excitement building behind his careful composure. He was wearing his favorite button-down shirt, navy blue like his favorite aircraft models, and had combed his hair with military precision. At 0930, Marcus positioned himself at the living room window, not anxiously pacing, but maintaining what he called overwatch, a term he had learned from watching documentaries about military operations. "Dad," he said without turning around, "there's a black car with government plates pulling into our driveway." I joined him at the window and felt my heart skip as I watched 3 people in military dress uniforms step out of an official sedan. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez was exactly as I had imagined her from our phone conversation, professional and commanding, flanked by a major I didn't recognize and a senior enlisted advisor whose chest displayed more ribbons than most generals. "This is it, buddy," I said, placing my hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You ready to meet some people who understand exactly how special you are?" Marcus straightened his shoulders in a gesture so naturally military that it took my breath away. "Yes, sir," he said quietly, and I knew in that moment that my family was about to witness something that would change their perception of both my son and their own judgment forever. The doorbell rang at exactly 1000 hours, and Marcus walked to the door with the kind of measured composure that would have made any drill sergeant proud. I opened it to find Lieutenant Colonel Martinez standing at attention, flanked by Major Williams and Sergeant Major Rodriguez, all three in pristine dress uniforms that gleamed with ribbons and insignia representing decades of distinguished service. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez stepped forward with a warm but professional smile. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Martinez. We spoke on the phone. And this must be Marcus." She looked down at my son with genuine respect, not the condescending way most adults address children, and I watched Marcus instinctively straighten to mirror her posture. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied with perfect military courtesy, extending his hand for a handshake that Lieutenant Colonel Martinez accepted with obvious approval. "It's an honor to meet you, ma'am. Thank you for coming to our home." The formality and respect in his voice clearly impressed all three visitors, and I saw them exchange glances that confirmed what I had known all along about my son's exceptional character. "May we come in?" Major Williams asked, and I stepped aside to welcome them into our living room. As they entered, I noticed Sergeant Major Rodriguez scanning the room with professional interest, taking in Marcus's carefully organized aircraft models, his military history books arranged with precision, and the small American flag displayed properly in the corner. Before we could settle into chairs, car doors slammed outside, and I heard the familiar voices of my family approaching the front door. My sister Sarah's laugh carried clearly through the windows, followed by my mother's voice saying something about stopping by to check on us since we had missed Christmas dinner. The irony of their timing was so perfect it felt orchestrated by a higher power. The doorbell rang again, and I looked at Lieutenant Colonel Martinez apologetically. "I'm sorry, these are unexpected visitors. Would you prefer to wait, or should I ask them to come back later?" She smiled with the kind of diplomatic grace that comes from years of handling complex situations. "Please invite them in. Community recognition is an important part of what we do here." I opened the door to find my entire family clustered on the porch: Sarah and her husband Mike, my brother Tom with his wife Lisa, my parents, and their 3 children who had been deemed worthy of Christmas dinner inclusion. They all started talking at once, explaining their surprise visit and asking why there was a government car in my driveway, but their voices died completely when they saw the 3 uniformed officers standing in my living room. "Oh my mother said, her hand flying to her chest. "We didn't realize you had company." "Military company." She looked around nervously, clearly trying to process why Pentagon officials would be in her grandson's living room on a Tuesday morning. Sarah stepped forward with her usual take-charge attitude, extending her hand toward Lieutenant Colonel Martinez. "I'm Sarah, Marcus's aunt. Is everything all right?" There was a subtle undertone in her voice that suggested she expected trouble, as if the only reason military officials would visit would be to address some kind of problem with Marcus. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez accepted the handshake with professional courtesy. "Everything is very much all right. We're here for a recognition ceremony." She gestured toward Marcus, who was standing quietly beside me, his hands clasped behind his back in a perfect at-ease position. "Your nephew has achieved something quite remarkable." The confusion on my family's faces was almost comical. Tom stepped forward, looking between Marcus and the officers with obvious bewilderment. "Marcus achieved something. What kind of achievement would bring Pentagon officials to a house for an 80-year-old? His tone carried the same dismissive undertone that had colored every interaction he'd ever had with my son. Major Williams moved to the center of the room, his bearing commanding attention from everyone present. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to formally recognize Marcus Thompson as one of 12 children selected nationwide for the Pentagon's inaugural Youth Strategic Leadership Recognition Program." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. My father was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Marcus was selected by the Pentagon. For what exactly?" The disbelief in his voice was so profound it was almost insulting, and I watched Marcus register his grandfather's shock with the same analytical observation he applied to everything else. Sergeant Major Rodriguez stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 30 years evaluating leadership potential. Marcus demonstrated exceptional analytical thinking, strategic reasoning, and leadership maturity that placed him in the top percentile of candidates nationwide. His application materials were among the most impressive we've ever reviewed for someone his age. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez opened an official portfolio and began reading from Marcus's evaluation summary. Marcus Thompson displays remarkable comprehension of military strategy, exceptional emotional intelligence in his interactions with veterans, and analytical capabilities that exceed graduate-level expectations. His volunteer work and veteran testimonials demonstrate leadership qualities that we typically see only in our most promising officer candidates. As she continued reading, listing Marcus's achievements and capabilities with official Pentagon authority, I watched my family's expressions transform from confusion to shock to something approaching awe. Sarah's mouth was literally hanging open. Tom had gone completely pale. My mother was gripping my father's arm as if she needed physical support. Lisa, who had dismissed Marcus as too serious just a month earlier, asked in a shaky voice, "What exactly does this recognition mean? What are they giving him?" The woman who had suggested Marcus needed to learn to be a normal kid was suddenly very interested in understanding his abnormal achievements. Major Williams smiled at Marcus, who had remained perfectly composed throughout the entire explanation. "Marcus, would you like to tell your family what this program includes?" I felt a surge of pride as my son stepped forward, not with arrogance or vindictiveness, but with the quiet dignity that had always defined him. "Yes, sir," Marcus said, looking around at his extended family with calm respect. The program includes full academic scholarships through high school and college, summer leadership development at military academies, mentorship from Pentagon officials, and direct pathways to service academy appointments. It's designed to develop future military leaders starting from childhood. The room fell silent again as the magnitude of what Marcus had achieved sank in. This wasn't a participation trophy or a local school award. This was the Pentagon of the United States recognizing an 80-year-old child as possessing the leadership potential worthy of their personal investment and development. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez opened an elegant wooden presentation box and removed a crystal certificate mounted on military-grade metal. "Marcus Thompson, by order of the Secretary of Defense and in recognition of your exceptional potential for strategic leadership and service to our nation, you are hereby inducted into the Pentagon Youth Strategic Leadership Recognition Program." She handed him the certificate with the same ceremony she would use for a medal presentation to a decorated officer. Marcus accepted the certificate with both hands, holding it carefully as he examined the official seals and signatures. "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly. "I promise to honor this recognition and work hard to become the leader you believe I can be." The maturity and grace in his response was so profound that I saw tears forming in Lieutenant Colonel Martinez's eyes. Sergeant Major Rodriguez stepped forward and presented Marcus with a second item, a military-style briefcase containing program materials, academy preparatory coursework, and a direct communication device for his Pentagon mentors. "This is your official program portfolio," he said. "You'll be working directly with our youth development team to prepare for your first leadership camp this summer." As the formal ceremony concluded, my family stood frozen in various states of shock and realization. The child they had consistently excluded, dismissed, and treated as a problem had just been honored by the highest military authority in the nation. The boy they thought was too serious and weird had been recognized as possessing the exact qualities that the Pentagon considered essential for future leadership. My nephew Jake, who had rolled his eyes at Marcus's airplane knowledge just weeks earlier, finally found his voice. "Marcus, that's really cool. Can you tell me about those leadership camps?" The respect in his voice was genuine, and I watched Marcus's face light up at being asked a sincere question by his cousin for the first time ever. "Of course," Marcus replied, his natural teaching instincts emerging. "They have programs at West Point, Annapolis, and the Air Force Academy where you learn tactical planning, leadership ethics, and strategic thinking. I'm most excited about the flight simulation training at the Air Force Academy summer program." His enthusiasm was infectious, and for the first time, I saw my family actually listening to him with genuine interest instead of polite tolerance. Sarah approached Marcus hesitantly, her earlier confidence replaced by obvious humility. "Marcus, honey, I owe you an apology." "We all do." I don't think we understood how special you are." Her voice was thick with emotion, and I could see her mentally reviewing every family gathering where they had excluded him, every moment when they had failed to recognize his worth. My mother stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Marcus, sweetheart, Grandma is so proud of you. Can you forgive us for not seeing how amazing you are?" She knelt down to his level, and Marcus, with the grace that had always defined him, stepped forward and hugged her without hesitation. "It's okay, Grandma," he said simply. "I know you love me. Sometimes people just don't understand things that are different from what they're used to." His forgiveness was immediate and genuine, without a trace of resentment or vindictiveness, and I felt my heart nearly burst with pride at the remarkable character my son displayed. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez gathered her materials and prepared to leave, but before departing, she addressed my family directly. "I want you to understand that what you witnessed here today represents years of exceptional development and character formation. Marcus didn't become this remarkable overnight. He has been demonstrating these qualities consistently, and it speaks highly of his father's guidance that we were made aware of his potential." After the Pentagon delegation left, my family remained in our living room, still processing what had happened. The dynamic had shifted completely and permanently. Marcus was no longer the difficult child who didn't fit in. He was the family member who had achieved something beyond any of their wildest expectations, recognized by authorities they could never question or dismiss. Tom approached me as the afternoon wound down, his voice heavy with regret. "I'm sorry, brother. We completely misjudged him. We misjudged you too, for that matter. Your military background helped you see something in Marcus that we missed completely." His apology was genuine, and I could see him struggling with the realization of how wrong they had been. The transformation was immediate and lasting. That very evening, Sarah called to invite Marcus to a special family dinner in his honor. My parents began making plans to attend his first leadership camp graduation. Lisa asked if Marcus would be willing to tutor Jake in history, recognizing that her son could benefit from Marcus's knowledge and study habits. But the most meaningful change was in Marcus himself. For the first time in his young life, he felt truly seen and valued by his extended family. The Pentagon recognition had given him external validation, but seeing his family's newfound respect and inclusion gave him something even more precious: the knowledge that he belonged exactly as he was. 3 months later, when Marcus left for his first leadership camp at West Point, the entire family gathered to see him off. The child they had once excluded from Christmas dinner was now the source of family pride, the cousin other children looked up to, the grandson who made his grandparents beam with stories of his achievements. As I watched him board the bus in his crisp camp uniform, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who finally knew his worth, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. My family had learned that brilliance comes in many forms, that different doesn't mean difficult, and that sometimes the quietest voices carry the most profound wisdom. Marcus had taught them that true strength doesn't demand attention, that real leadership serves others, and that character matters more than conformity. The Pentagon had recognized these qualities in my son, but more importantly, his family had finally learned to see them too. The last thing Lieutenant Colonel Martinez had said before leaving still echoed in my mind. The greatest leaders are often the ones who seem different because they see possibilities others miss. Marcus has that gift, and now he has the support system to develop it fully. Standing in our driveway after the bus disappeared, surrounded by family members who now understood what I had always known about my son, I felt a deep peace. Marcus was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was meant to do, recognized finally for exactly who he was meant to be. They called my son difficult and said he was too much trouble for family gatherings, but when those Pentagon officials walked into our living room 4 days after Christmas and handed him that certificate, my family finally understood what I had been trying to tell them all along. The morning light was streaming through our kitchen window when I got the call that would change everything, but first, let me tell you about Christmas Eve, when my own family decided once again that my 80-year-old son Marcus wasn't worth including in their celebration. Before I share this story with you, I want to know you're here with me. Just say listening in the comments or let me know where you are listening from. I love knowing how far this story reaches and that there are others who understand what it means to fight for your child when the world seems determined to count them out. The text message came from my sister Sarah at 11:30 on Christmas Eve morning. Marcus was in his room, carefully organizing his model planes by aircraft type, something he had been doing since he could barely walk. The message was short and brutal in its casual cruelty. Family dinner moved to 2 o'clock. Sorry, not enough space for everyone this year. Maybe next time. I stared at that message for a full minute, feeling the familiar weight of disappointment settle in my chest like a stone. This was the fourth family gathering this year where Marcus had been quietly uninvited, and each time the excuse was different, but the message was always the same. Your son doesn't fit in with our perfect family picture. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his pajamas, holding his favorite F-22 Raptor model. His dark eyes, so much like mine, looked up at me with that mix of hope and resignation that no 80-year-old should ever have to carry. Dad, he said quietly, are we going to Aunt Sarah's today for Christmas dinner? I knelt down to his level, looking into those intelligent eyes that saw far too much for his age. I could see him already reading my expression, already preparing himself for another disappointment. The kid had developed armor that most adults never learned to build, and it broke my heart every single time I witnessed it. Not today, buddy, I said, keeping my voice steady. But that means we get to have our own Christmas adventure, just the two of us. His small smile was brave, but didn't quite reach his eyes, and I felt that familiar fire building in my chest, the same one that had carried me through 3 deployments and countless impossible missions. The thing about my family is they see Marcus as this disruptive force, this child who asks too many questions and thinks too deeply about things they consider unimportant. At my brother Tom's birthday party in September, Marcus had spent the entire evening in the corner with Tom's old war history books, completely absorbed while the other kids ran around screaming and breaking things. My mother had pulled me aside and said, "He's just so intense, honey. It makes everyone uncomfortable." At Sarah's 4th of July barbecue, Marcus had noticed that the flag was hung improperly and had quietly approached my father to point it out, explaining the proper protocol he had learned from watching military documentaries. Instead of being impressed by his attention to detail and respect for the flag, my father had laughed and said, "Kid thinks he knows everything. Maybe he should spend less time with those war movies and more time learning how to play with other children." The worst was Thanksgiving, just a month before Christmas. Marcus had brought a book about aerodynamics to dinner, hoping to share what he had learned about flight patterns with his cousins. When he tried to explain how birds and planes use similar principles to stay airborne, my nephew Jake, who is 12, had rolled his eyes and said, "Nobody cares about your weird airplane stuff, Marcus." My sister-in-law Lisa had laughed and added, "He's always so serious. Can't he just be a normal kid for 5 minutes?" I had watched Marcus's face crumble for just a moment before he carefully rebuilt his composure, nodded politely, and asked to be excused from the table. He spent the rest of Thanksgiving sitting alone on the back porch, quietly reading his book while the family continued their loud, shallow conversations inside. I found him there an hour later, completely absorbed in a chapter about the physics of lift, and my heart had nearly shattered at how content he was in his solitude. What my family didn't understand, what they refused to see, was that Marcus wasn't difficult or weird or antisocial. He was extraordinary in ways they couldn't comprehend because they had never been around true excellence. I had spent 12 years in the Army, 4 of those as a Special Forces operator, and I recognized something in my son that civilian families often miss. He had the same quiet intensity, the same analytical mind, the same unshakable focus that I had seen in the best soldiers I had ever served with. At 3 years old, Marcus could identify aircraft by their silhouettes. At 5, he was reading technical manuals about military strategy and explaining tactical concepts that most adults couldn't grasp. At 6, he had built a working periscope from household materials after watching a documentary about submarines. Now at 8, he could field strip and reassemble a radio, navigate by stars, and had memorized the chain of command structure for every branch of the military. But to my family, these weren't signs of exceptional intelligence and potential leadership. They were evidence that he was too serious, too focused, too different from their idea of what a normal child should be. They wanted him to be loud and careless and interested in the same shallow entertainment that occupied their own children. They wanted him to fit into their comfortable, limited understanding of childhood, and when he couldn't or wouldn't, they simply decided he wasn't worth including. Christmas Eve afternoon, Marcus and I drove to the local VA hospital where I volunteered twice a month, reading to veterans who had no family visitors during the holidays. Marcus always came with me, and the older veterans absolutely loved him. They would spend hours talking with him about military history, strategy, aircraft specifications, anything that sparked his brilliant mind. Watching him interact with these decorated heroes, seeing how they respected his knowledge and appreciated his genuine interest in their stories, always reminded me of what my family was missing. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had lost both legs in Afghanistan, looked up when we walked into the recreation room. "There's my favorite military historian," he called out, and Marcus's entire face lit up with genuine joy. They spent 2 hours discussing the tactics used in the Battle of Midway, with Marcus asking thoughtful questions and Rodriguez explaining strategic decisions with the patience of a grandfather teaching his grandson. When it was time to leave, Rodriguez pulled me aside while Marcus was saying goodbye to the other veterans. "That boy of yours has something special," he said quietly. "I've seen a lot of soldiers come and go, and he's got the mind of a natural leader. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I drove home that evening with Marcus fast asleep in the back seat, still clutching a Model P-51 Mustang that one of the veterans had given him. The quiet satisfaction on his face, even in sleep, told me everything I needed to know about where he belonged and where he felt valued. My family could keep their shallow gatherings and their narrow definitions of acceptable behavior. My son had found his tribe among heroes, and that was worth more than 1,000 awkward family dinners. That night, after Marcus was in bed, I sat at my kitchen table and made a decision that had been building for months. I pulled out my laptop and began typing an email that would change everything, though I didn't know it at the time. The subject line was simple: nomination for National Youth Leadership Development Program. The recipient was Colonel Patricia Hayes, my former commanding officer who now worked in Pentagon youth outreach programs. I wrote about Marcus's exceptional analytical abilities, his deep respect for military service, his natural leadership qualities that he displayed during our volunteer work at the VA hospital. I wrote about his remarkable maturity, his ability to connect with veterans across generational lines, his genuine passion for military history and strategy. I wrote about a child who had been overlooked and undervalued by his own family, but who possessed the exact qualities that the military had always recognized and cultivated in its finest leaders. I attached videos of Marcus explaining aircraft specifications, photos of him reading to veterans at the hospital, documentation of his volunteer hours, and the positive feedback from staff members who had worked with him. I included a letter of recommendation from Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and testimonials from 3 other veterans who had spent time mentoring Marcus during our hospital visits. At the bottom of the email, I wrote something that came straight from my heart as both a soldier and a father. This child has been dismissed by people who cannot see past their own limited expectations, but I have witnessed him demonstrate the character, intelligence, and leadership potential that this program was designed to recognize and develop. He deserves the chance to be seen for who he truly is, not who others think he should be. I hit send at 11:47 on Christmas Eve, never imagining that 4 days later, my phone would ring with a call that would vindicate every moment of faith I had placed in my remarkable son. But that Christmas morning, as Marcus and I opened our presents alone together, I felt a deep peace knowing that I had done what any good soldier does for his fellow warriors. I had made sure he wouldn't be left behind, no matter what it took.